Alright, what is going on, guys? So today is not a video about German, and I guess I will explain real quickly what I'm going to do with that series. After a while, things just kind of got hectic, and I have not stopped the challenge, by the way. I have changed my strategy a bit. I will be releasing videos monthly for that, just because I feel like just putting some sort of German like soundtrack over me, doing Anki cards every week is kind of boring, for lack of a better word. And there's something I want it to be more, I guess, motivating and kind of what my thoughts are in the process. And I feel like if I do that through a monthly cycle, it will be easier to do what I am trying to do compared to doing that through a weekly cycle, especially given the fact I have a very busy schedule. So the entire purpose of this video, I got a comment the other day that was a very good comment, was about my process for, I guess my history of me trying to learn Russian. So, я хочу сказать, что я говорю по-русски достаточно свободно путешествовать. Я очень редко говорю по-русски, потому что в США почти никто нет. Говорят на русском, к сожалению. So basically, I speak a little bit of Russian, enough to have a conversation, basically portray what I want to say. Is it as good as my English? No, not necessarily. I have around roughly 6,500 to 7,000 Anki Russian cards. Since I've been doing this German challenge, I have not been keeping up with my Russian Anki cards just because I'm definitely in the mindset of one language at a time. But anyway, how did I get to the point where I can speak somewhat freely? Do I have a degree in Russian? Have I taken Russian classes? So that is the entire purpose of this video. So this is completely unscripted. Basically, I'm just going to go through from the beginning of my Russian experience, why I chose to learn it, what I went through to learn it, what I feel like is most effective, most ineffective, and where I am now with it. So I guess starting off, currently I am 26 years old. I started off learning Russian, I would say probably 17, 18. So my senior year of high school, we had an option to take like an online language course basically of our choosing. If you wanted to, it could be something exotic, or I mean, I could take a Mandarin or a Japanese, or I don't even know if they had a Mongolian or something, but basically any language you could think of, any somewhat common language that you can think of that's usually not offered, at least in an American high school. For reference, for those that aren't American, usually the options we get are Spanish, French, maybe if you're lucky German, and that's usually pretty much it. So I wanted to do Russian. The reason I wanted to learn Russian, I've always been obsessed with like really cold weather my entire life. Maybe that's because I grew up in the southeast part of the country. We didn't get snow or anything at all like that. And the idea of like Siberia and this vastness, and to me it's like Alaska times five almost. That's just the way I viewed it. Not necessarily that I was obsessed with, I guess, the Soviet stuff or any of that. I know a lot of people like a bald and bankrupt type. That's kind of what they live for. That didn't really necessarily do too much for me, but it's definitely something. It's some of these regions. If you want to explore them, you have to speak Russian. And from all the research, I've always liked the idea of learning a second language. In the Anglosphere, I guess, is one of the few places in the world where most people don't necessarily speak a second language. It's kind of, you speak English, like, why do you need to speak anything else? Where in other countries that is definitely not the case. And I never really liked that at all. I definitely feel like speaking different languages, I guess, enhances your abilities to perceive things and make new relationships, and it just gives you a new perspective on things. And I always want to learn a second language, but I had to be useful. And if I'm putting in this much effort, I want something that is useful, pretty much, that I can actually use. So initially, I kind of did want to do German, but the fact that it's like three-quarters of Germans speak English pretty fluently kind of threw that out. I actually tried learning Norwegian for a little while just because I looked at a list of easiest languages to learn, and Norwegian for English speakers was near the top. And the reason I stopped that is, again, almost everybody in Norway speaks English, so what's the point? Plus, Norway is a pretty small country, small population. I would only be able to use it in Norway. And yeah, Russian's a bit more difficult, but it would be way more useful. Most Russian speakers don't speak English, at least from the research I've seen. Actually, from going over there, yeah, I can verify that most Russian speakers do not speak English. And I just thought it would be useful. It's a fun language. It always sounds cool in all movies and everything. I was really into Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the first one, back in the day. And obviously there's a lot of Russian things, and you always see these like washed out like Soviet towns and everything's in Russian, and it's like, oh, what are those cool words, what did they say? I just think the alphabet looks really cool, so that was kind of a deciding factor for me. So basically I took this class, and I was kind of, I don't want to say disappointed, I think I want to say I did a bit of Duolingo, which honestly nowadays I don't recommend. If it's something you're doing as a hobby, fine, do Duolingo. If you actually want to learn the language, I kind of view it as a wasted time. So I did this class. It was Rosetta Stone. It was more basically, it's kind of weird the way it was structured. I mean, I got the entire class done in a few weeks for the entire semester, and I didn't really learn that much. So, I mean, you get the basics, мужчина, женщина, привет, здравствуйте. I don't even know if it went through any conjugations or anything like that. So I had a very, very like entry level understanding. Definitely not enough to hold a conversation. During college, whenever I did anything stupid or I was like drunk or something or doing things I probably shouldn't have, I'd try to shout out and do things in Russian, and kind of made myself look like an idiot because I only knew like 5 words, but I just assumed because I took one class I knew the entire language and I was just alternating between the 5 words. So yeah, I didn't really take it seriously. So I guess that gets into part two. That's part one. I guess that would be the beginning. Part two is when I took it seriously. So basically, what happened was when I got out of college, COVID happened, and I just moved into a new town, small town in the Midwest. Didn't really know anybody. Got laid off from my job basically for like half a year. I mean, the first couple of weeks were awesome. It was like vacation, right? It's like woohoo, don't have to work. But after a while, I mean, I'm sure everybody else watching this video can relate through COVID. I mean, it was kind of rough for me, especially mentally and emotionally. I'm out on my own for the first time. I have no idea what's going on, and suddenly it's like life just stops. And it's just this weird artificial thing. And I'm like, I gotta do something productive. Like, I need to do something productive. I can't just sit at home wallowing around. I don't know anybody. I don't have any friends. I'm not in contact with anybody for months. Like, with the exception of phone calls, with my family members, like, I'm not seeing another human being, and like, at once a month when I go grocery shopping. That's it. So, basically, it's like, you know what? I've always wanted to learn a language my entire life. So, I did a crap ton of research, and I'm like, I'm gonna learn a language. That's what I'm gonna do. During COVID, while some people are wasting all their time doing this, doing that, like I'm gonna do something productive. I'm gonna learn a language. So I did a lot of research. One of my favorite channels was Matt versus Japan, and that is where I found about the AJAT method, all Japanese all the time. And this guy seemed like he spoke amazing Japanese, and basically said his method was, or the method that he copied, was I just use Japanese for everything. I don't use English anymore. And if you read the AJAT, there's an AJAT blog you can go on, and this is kind of the basis for my AGAT German series that I've been doing. Granted, I have not been, it's a lot harder when you have a full-time job, but I'll get to that in the next part of this. And I started doing that for Russian, the ARAT method. So I have found all sorts of things, and I've already made videos on how I do my ARAT. And I did all this during pretty much COVID, during the lockdowns, and I just did Russian everything. So I would wake up in the morning. I mean, in my mind, it was like a 9 to 5 job, and I would literally go up to the kitchen table and pretty much like 8 to 4:30 every single day. I would do nothing but Russian study. So this is my original Russian textbook, sort of textbook, and I mean this is just a yard sale find, book sale, cheapy, like 25, 50 cent Russian book that we've just been had sitting around the house. I think my mom thought I'd be interested in it. She picked it up for me. So, and I literally went through page, learned everything I possibly could in this book, and the way I used it, I mean, my life depended on it. So I learned every single lesson. I sat down, and if I couldn't figure something out, I mean, it might take me 8 hours to try to learn one lesson. I just sat at the kitchen table and just again. And I was writing like these huge long lists of all the words and the alphabet. And I did this 8, 9 hours a day. And then at the end of that, I guess to celebrate, I would watch a Russian movie. Or at first I used English subtitles. Eventually I got rid of those. But Russian music, I did nothing in English. Like almost nothing. I mean, just the bare minimum. Obviously I still talk to family members and stuff like that. But with the exception of that, I did everything in Russian. And a lot of people don't like to hear that. The problem is with the language, you don't really learn a language. You get used to a language. And same way you learn English is through immersion, and it's not an easy process. It's not. And eventually, when you get good enough with another language, you start understanding enough of it where you can still, entertain yourself, and it's still just as entertaining. So I can watch like basic Russian stuff, and I don't have to think about it. It just makes sense instantly. Now, am I necessarily what I consider myself 100% C2 fluent at the language at this point in my life? No. If I had to guess, I'd probably say like a B2, somewhere around there. I'd probably have the understanding of I don't know, like a 7, 8 year old, which is kind of depressing to think about. But I don't use it every day. It's kind of difficult for me to use, and I know enough to get around. So another one of the is, what is your goals, and is it worth the amount of effort that you're having to put in to achieve those goals? Why the heck did? Is it worth the amount of effort to achieve those goals? And for a lot of people, the case is no. I mean, let's say you really want to learn Italian. Are you willing to go without speaking English for 3, 4 years to learn Italian? If the answer is no, then it's no. It is what it is. There's nothing wrong with going on Duolingo and knowing a few words here and there. But if you're actually serious about becoming fluent on a language, that's what you have to do. And in my mind, during COVID, this was like a once in a lifetime opportunity where I could put everything down and just focus on the language. So that's what I did, and like I said, I have full binders or notebooks just full of notes and me sitting down, like I said, literally 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that's all I did. So that's how I got pretty good at Russian. Because of that AJAT method, I started hitting Anki pretty hard. So I think in the beginning I was doing like 50 words a day. Once I had to get back into the workforce, I dropped that down to 20 because it was more manageable. I was just working 8 hour days, so it wasn't necessarily too big of a deal. I definitely noticed a big change though. So once the lockdown started to end and I had to go back to work, then I definitely had to, how do I say, improvise almost. Obviously, I didn't have enough time to do what I was doing during the lockdown. I was actually slightly annoyed that I couldn't get all my Russian reps in, which is kind of a spoiled thing to say because given the whole COVID thing was very artificial, most people don't have that opportunity just to sit down and do nothing and just study a language for days on end. So yeah, I did 20 words a day. I add 20 words a day. Again, that's kind of the AGAT challenge that I'm doing now. So I guess that would get into my next part of this How I Learn Russian series, or How I Learned Somewhat Conversational Russian series. Right towards the end of COVID, I have another YouTube channel called Actual Exotic Cars. I haven't really made a video there for a while just because I've lost so much money on it. But long story short, I went to Russia. I flew to Moscow. I want to say COVID was still going on, but the lockdowns, at least in the US, were over and I was back at work. So I was doing, again, 20 Anki cards a day. I was studying up big time. This is like my first real time going abroad. And if you don't know, unless you live under a rock, relations between the U.S. and Russia have been pretty shaky for a very long time, albeit with a few gaps here and there. And I had to get a visa. It was a bit difficult. I think the only country I'd been to before this was Canada, so I've never been to Europe or anything. I had no idea what to expect. And during COVID, I flew to Russia to buy a vehicle. That's why I brought up the whole Actual Exotic Cars thing. So I reached out to this guy named Tony, who had a website called Travel Real Russia. He actually has moved to Canada since then, so does Travel Real Canada, so shout out to Tony. But he arranged this entire trip. And amazing guy, but I got in contact with him, and I've never used WhatsApp before. I never, just trying to go back and forth with him. I didn't know this whole new world outside of the U.S. I was very, just the way I was raised and everything. It's just like America. I don't say America only, but traveling abroad was not really a thing at all in my family. So went to Russia. Again, I was super paranoid that anybody would figure out that I was American, probably over paranoid. So I tried to speak Russian as much as I could. And the thing is, probably because I was so Anki focused, and that's probably a drawback, that is a drawback of just doing Anki, is that my written, I shouldn't say written, if I read Russian or listen to Russian, I'm very good at input. I'm not very good at output. So people are asking me questions and stuff, and there's a lot of weird sounds in Russian that are very difficult for a native English speaker to reproduce. The sh, some of the letters are definitely pretty difficult, and they could obviously tell I was a foreigner. I had some times where cops were screaming things at me because they assumed I was Russian. No idea what they're saying. I just put my head down and kept on walking. I had one time where a cop grabbed me, shouldn't say grab me, but I think put his hand on me and was trying to say, put your mask on or something. Again, this was during COVID. And I did understand that, and I put it on, but it was kind of a scary couple seconds. I had zero issues, by the way, when I was in Russia. So again, this is not a political channel. I don't go into politics, really. I don't like talking about politics necessarily either. I had zero issues. Everything was clean, safe. It was an amazing trip. Tony was absolutely amazing. He actually kind of got annoyed. Shouldn't really say a lot of Russian speakers in Russia, they expect you to speak Russian, right? So you have all these Russian, Georgia and Armenia and Belarus, blah, 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 blah. The whole Eastern Bloc, they just kind of expect you to speak Russian, kind of like people in America would expect you to speak English. And I ran into that a little bit. So, somebody, I would order something in Russian. I'm all proud of myself. They understood. They bring out my order. But they were annoyed because they didn't like my accent or something. And it's like, well, geez, I'm an American. I've spent thousands of hours trying to learn your language. I mean, you can at least show a little bit of respect. I could just be speaking around in English, but I'm not. So that part was, I guess, sort of annoying. But I definitely loved it over there. It was an amazing experience. I'm very thankful I got through before. First thing, the day I left, the day after the lockdown in Russia, they had a gigantic lockdown, and you had to have the Sputnik Russian vaccine to not be in that lockdown, which obviously I'm an American, I don't even have access to that. And if you don't have that, you're not allowed to go to a hotel, a restaurant. Like, I would literally be on the streets pretty much. So I got out at the right time. I was there for about a couple weeks. I got the vehicle and everything. And if you want to see that story, that's on actual exotic cars. It's a whole other story that I'm not going to delve into again. But as far as the Russian language goes, it was really cool in my mind. I did get to speak to a lot of natives, and it was kind of a wake-up call to me, because it's like all this time and energy I spent into Russian, and I still had huge difficulties understanding people. So I guess that would bring me into the next step here. So I think we're on step number 4, which would be the post-trip. Basically what happened is probably a few months after the whole situation with Ukraine broke out, and something that Matt versus Japan kind of mentioned, and now that I was back in normal life, I was actually getting really depressed just sitting down, in my room alone trying to learn Russian all day. And it was something mentally I had difficulties with. I was not happy at all. It's like I want to learn this language at any cost, but it's like I'm destroying my social life. Like I it's something I want to do, but is it even really worth it? And mentally, I just couldn't take it anymore. And then I think the final nail in the coffin was when the whole Ukraine situation broke out. I'm like, well, great. Then what's even the point now? I can't even go over there anymore. So I actually took kind of a hiatus for about half a year or something like that, and I would say part of that was mental, emotional, spiritual, whatever you want to say. And that entire situation was happening in the background during that time. So again, I stopped doing my Anki cards. I stopped making new Anki cards. I wasn't really doing immersion anymore. When you get to a certain level of a language, it's not like you instantly forget it after you start using it. It takes some time, so it's not like I necessarily lost everything that I learned. And a lot of the grammar rules and stuff that I was, 8 to 5 every single day at the kitchen counter learning, like obviously I still retain most of that. I've done videos on some of those recently, but it was kind of a hiatus period. And my dad actually talked me into getting back into it. It's like, hey dude, you put all this effort in, you might as well finish it. So eventually, about 6 months later, something like that, ballpark, I started doing it again. Again, I dropped down 20 words of Anki a day. The goal was to get up to 10,000 cards, which I still haven't achieved yet, and at some point that is definitely a goal of mine. And yeah, I kept on doing Russian. I did not do immersion to the same amount or degree that I was. But again, it's one of those, the all or nothing approach that Katsumoto brings up in AJAT, I feel like it does have some delirious side effects. So it's very hard. If you read the AJAT blog post, if you read through it, I mean, he was talking about like going to the movie theater and putting earbuds in, so because the movie was in English and it has to be in Japanese, and anything in English on his wall he's ripping down and put on Japanese, and you make yourself this isolated little hunk of Japan in the middle of English world. And it's like, yeah, that sounds cool when you read it, but when you actually do that in practice, like I said, to isolate yourself that much, it's very difficult and mentally draining. At that point, I would say just study abroad or something. At least you can get that same experience without isolating yourself. So that is something that I definitely, and I will say to anybody, it's a weird pendulum between just like Duolingo 5 minutes a day, where obviously you're never going to learn the language, versus going full in every day, doing complete immersion, where yeah, you're going to learn the language really fast, but at what cost? And is it worth it to you? And that's something that if you're learning a language, you need to decide for yourself. So that's basically my strategy. Moving on, I guess the next step, I moved to the city and for work-related reasons. And then I started to, the reason I got the job that I did get, and this is about a couple years ago, a year or two ago, is because I'm going to finish up my engineering degree. It's something that I haven't done and I feel like I should do. And the employer that I work with are paying for that pretty much. So I'm working full time and I'm doing that on the side. With that being said, I really don't have a lot of time. So I never stopped doing my Russian. I tried the best I could. There's a couple months I slip here and there. And it's very difficult doing it with a full time job. And I feel like that's part of the reason I wanted to make this channel was the fact that most people, if you have a family, full time job, you're going to college, like you might not necessarily have the time. So it's like just doing the best you can of managing it. And the entire reason to learn a language, in my mind, is to talk and communicate with more people. That's why you want to learn a language. It's not to isolate yourself. And all these other channels, I feel like they just go through the pure isolation, and it's almost like ripping off a band-aid. It's like, yeah, 5 years of your life's gonna suck, but now you speak Japanese, and it's completely worth it. And it's like, I don't know if it necessarily is. So I do have Russian friends and stuff that I still speak with, albeit they prefer to speak English because their English is better than my Russian. Um, I definitely think it's useful. So I went to a trip to Georgia and Armenia the other year, and I used Russian quite a bit, and people understood me. I mean, there's a couple issues here and there, but I was able to get around, get taxis, order food, uh, basically do anything that I wanted to do. Some people, they were asking me questions and stuff. They just assumed that because I was white, that I was Russian, I was able to, answer questions and this and that. I'm sure I had an accent or something, but who cares? I could understand. That's the entire purpose of learning a language. So that's pretty much where I am with that. As far as this German thing, I just kind of wanted to prove that in this time of my life, with all this stuff going on, that it's still possible to learn a language. Because like I said, all the approaches, especially for the AJAP method, which I feel like is the best method, but it's always all or nothing. And it's like, if you have a very busy lifestyle, you could still learn a language. And in my mind, it's as simple as if you're playing a video game, change the language to Russian. If you're listening to music, listen to Russian music. It doesn't mean you can't hang out with friends. It doesn't mean, when you're at work, you have to have earbuds in at all time and you have to live in this fantasy Russian secret world. But now and then, you can definitely put some of it in there. And if it's a daily thing, after a while, you're going to get used to it. So I actually have here, before I started doing Anki cards, which is why I highly recommend Anki, by the way. My mom was bugging me for not reading the Bible enough. So I went through, I think this is the book of Exodus in Russian, and I literally made, if you can see in the camera here, like word list, all the words that I didn't know for basically, this is like half the book or something like that. And I was trying to color code them too with the different, which in Russian there's really no reason to do this because you can tell from the ending what part of speech it is. But, I mean, this thing is like half full of all these words. And I was reviewing these words pretty much every day. And then I had a bag of like 1,000 note cards or something, and it got way too high. And I was trying to separate them into different piles. Like, okay, like these, like privyet, hi. I know that word. I don't need to necessarily see it every day. Where there's other words, let me think of one, like kislorod. Stuff like that, like different elements and stuff in the periodic table, where it's like, yeah, I might forget this word, I don't necessarily use it all the time, but do I need to remember it? So I was going through a bunch of note cards every day, and it's like, man, I wish there was an automated way where I didn't have to do this, and that's when I discovered AJAT and SRS, and it basically does all that for you. So if I know a word like privyet, I might not see that card for another few years from now, or if there's a word like kislorod, which, maybe I fail it all the time because I rarely see the word and I don't really see it through immersion that much because it's kind of an odd word, then yeah, I'll see it more frequently. So that's why I strongly recommend Anki. So that is pretty much my Russian story. Do I plan on going back? We'll see what the future brings. I definitely enjoy Eastern Europe. I've been there several times now, and Russian is very helpful and useful. Even just basic Russian is very helpful and useful. It's a very difficult language. And actually, as an experiment, I wanted to do like full university classes on this language on my channel for free, which I still might do. So I actually bought the textbook that Harvard, I think Harvard language, the language school for Russian uses. I think Northwestern University, their Russian program uses the same textbook. And I was going to buy like the level 1 textbook and go step by step, exercise through exercise. And basically you'd have an Ivy League Russian education for free. And I went through the textbook. I accidentally bought the intermediate book instead of the beginner book on accident. And I was going through all the lessons. I'm like, this is all like week 1, week 2 basic Russian stuff. I'm like, how is this intermediate, especially at an Ivy League? This is pathetic. So, but you got to realize I was doing this for 40 hours a week, just grammar, not even immersion, just the grammar itself. So my understanding of this stuff is going to be way, just because I have way more time into it, even than somebody who has like a, crazy high IQ and intellect. If you're only doing this a few hours a week during class, well, I'm pretty much doing it as a full-time job. There's no way you're going to be able to keep up. So the grammar is very difficult with Russian. The vocabulary, I mean, just saying hello, for example, right? Like in German, hallo. Russian, здравствуйте, or здравствуй, or, I mean, there's so many different ways of saying it, or same thing with thank you, благодарю, благодарю вас, спасибо, огромное спасибо. Like, you can go on and on down the list, and the words are pretty difficult to say. So it is a bit of a language. It's definitely something that you have to want, and it's definitely something. After I'm done with this German challenge, I think what my goal is I'll probably get up to 10,000 Anki cards, and then I'll just stop it there. Because at that point, I feel like, even right now, I feel like I have enough vocabulary. It's just getting the immersion in to get the words to stick together. Because if I have subtitles, I can pretty much watch anything I want with Russian. I mean, I got to think about it a little bit. But I can watch pretty much anything that I want without having to look stuff up all the time, which is very nice. But it was a long road to get here. So that is my Russian experience, or I should say my experience with the Russian language. That's where I am at with it today, and I guess that's a little life update and where I am with the German challenge. I guess to summarize that a little bit further, I would say that I will be making videos monthly for that now, and hopefully they will be a little more involved than what I have been doing, because it's just been, with work and school and stuff, it's been pretty stressful, and I feel like doing 1 month would space things out better. But anyway, thank you for watching, and I appreciate it, and do wistorechi.